You know, I held on to this empty milk jug all winter because of what it did for my tomatoes last summer. In my own garden, one mature Brandywine gave me close to 90 pounds last summer, not because of magic fertilizer, but because the water finally reached the roots. And the funny part? I only walked out to refill this jug once every 5 days. Now, if last July had you dragging hoses at sunset with an aching back, or almost canceling a weekend with the grandbabies because you knew the tomatoes wouldn't make it, or finding that heartbreaking black patch on the bottom of a tomato you'd watched ripen for weeks, pull up a chair. A dear friend, an old market gardener, taught me this trick years ago. Let me show you. Before I show you the jug, I need to tell you something that surprised me when I first learned it. That black patch on the bottom of your tomatoes? It's almost never because your soil is missing calcium. In most gardens, the soil already has calcium. The same goes for the cracking, the splitting, the plants that look beautiful in June and just give up by August. Here's what's really happening underneath your feet. A tomato plant, when it's grown the way nature intended, sends its roots down 2 to 3 feet into the soil. Deep, drought-tolerant, patient. Tomatoes evolved in the dry valleys of South America. They're built to hunt for water deep underground. But when we water a little bit every evening, with a watering can or a quick spray from the hose, we accidentally train those roots to stay shallow. They cluster in the top 2 or 3 inches of soil, where the moisture is. And that's where the trouble starts. Shallow roots can't pull calcium up into the fruit reliably. They dry out the moment the sun hits them. They make your plant a roller coaster soaking wet at 6 in the evening, bone dry by noon the next day. That swing wet, dry, is one of the biggest culprits behind blossom end rot and cracked skins. Not always your soil, not always your variety. The way the water is reaching the roots matters more than most of us were ever taught. And that's exactly what this milk jug fixes. So, here's what we do instead. We take an empty 1-gallon milk jug, the kind you'd toss in the recycling bin tomorrow morning, and we bury it right next to the tomato plant. Just the body of the jug goes underground. The neck stays above the soil, with the cap loose. We put small holes near the bottom, fill the jug with water, and walk away. What happens next is the whole secret. That water seeps out slowly, over hours, right where the roots are actually feeding 6, 8, 10 inches down. No evaporation off the surface, no splashing on the leaves, no water lost to weeds. The roots learn to grow deep, because that's where the water is. And the soil stays evenly moist, instead of swinging between soaking wet and bone dry. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds an awful lot like drip irrigation, and you're right, it works on the very same principle. The difference is, you don't need timers, tubing, filters, or a $100 starter kit. You just need a jug you were already going to throw away. And this isn't some new internet trend, either. This idea is 4,000 years old. The ancient Romans buried clay pots called ollas next to their crops. Farmers in India have been doing it with matka pots for centuries. Spanish settlers brought the method to the American Southwest. The only thing that's changed is that today, we use the milk jug from this morning's breakfast. Same physics, different material. And if watering has been holding your tomatoes back, this may be the simplest fix you try all season. Let me walk you through exactly how to set one up. Start to finish. This takes about 5 minutes per jug. First, give your milk jug a quick rinse with warm water and a splash of white vinegar. That gets rid of any milk residue that could attract ants. Let it dry while you grab your tools. Now we make the holes. You want 6 to 8 small holes, about the size of a peppercorn, roughly 1/16 of an inch across. Place them around the bottom third of the jug, not all the way at the bottom. I'm using a small drill bit here, which is the safest and most consistent way. If you don't have a drill, an awl works, or a heated nail, but if you're going to heat a nail, please do it outside, with gloves and good ventilation. The exact tool matters less than the result. Small, clean holes near the bottom. Next, dig a hole right beside your tomato plant. Not too close, about 6 to 8 inches away from the main stem. Any closer, and you risk damaging the roots when you dig. Any farther, and the water won't reach where you need it. Dig down deep enough that the body of the jug sits underground, with just the neck and cap sticking up about an inch or two. If you remember only one thing from this video, remember this: the holes go underground, the neck stays above ground. Lower the jug in, backfill the soil around it, and press it down gently so it doesn't tip. Now, and this is the part most people get wrong, the cap. Screw it back on, but only halfway. Loose. If you tighten that cap down, you create a vacuum inside the jug. and the water simply will not come out. You'll come back in 3 days wondering why nothing drained. If you take the cap off entirely, you've made yourself a mosquito hotel. So leave it loose. That's the sweet spot. Fill the jug to the top with your hose. You'll hear it gurgle as the air escapes. That's exactly what should happen. Now here's the part I want you to actually see for yourself. I filled this jug at 7 this morning. It's just past noon now. Look at the surface of the soil bone dry on top. The sun's been beating down. But watch what happens when I dig down just 3 inches, right at the root zone. That soil is cool, damp. Exactly where the roots are feeding. The water didn't disappear. It went exactly where it needed to go. That's the whole point of this method, and that's why it works when surface watering fails. Now, how many jugs do you need? That depends on the kind of tomato you're growing. For the big indeterminate varieties, Brandywines, Cherokee Purples, beefsteaks, those vines that climb 6 feet tall, use 2 jugs per plant, 1 on each side. They drink a lot. Determinate varieties like Romas and paste tomatoes, 1 jug is plenty. Same with cherry tomatoes. This method also works beautifully for peppers, eggplants, and sometimes cucumbers and squash in larger beds. But those are videos for another day. Today we're sticking with tomatoes, because tomatoes are where this trick really earns its keep. One quick warning though, don't use this method for lettuce, spinach, onions, garlic, or carrots. Their roots stay shallow, or they grow straight down, and the water from the buried jug just won't reach them properly. For those crops, stick with surface watering. Now, the question I get asked more than any other about this method is it safe to bury plastic next to food we're going to eat? Here's my honest answer. A milk jug is made of HDPE, that's the number 2 plastic stamped on the bottom of every jug at the grocery store. It's the same plastic used to store the milk you drink with breakfast. Buried away from sunlight, in normal garden soil, it stays stable. The thing that actually breaks plastic down isn't soil contact, it's UV rays. So if you bury your jug deep and cover that exposed neck with a layer of straw mulch, you protect it from the only thing that really degrades it. What you do want to avoid is PVC pipe, that's number 3 plastic. Never use PVC for this, and clear soda bottles will break down faster in direct sun than an opaque milk jug. Inspect your jug at the end of each season. If it still feels firm and looks intact, use it again. If it turns brittle, cracked, or chalky, retire it and grab another from the recycling bin. You've got plenty more where that came from. Now, I know some of you are still going to feel uneasy about burying any plastic near your tomatoes, and I respect that. If that's you, there's a beautiful, old-fashioned alternative unglazed terracotta olas. Same exact principle, no plastic at all. They run about $25 to $30 a piece, and they'll last you years. Same physics, just clay instead of plastic. Both methods work. I use milk jugs because they're free, and they do the job. But the choice is yours. All right, you've got your jug buried, you know it's safe, you know how many to use. The question now is, how often do you actually need to fill it? Under normal summer conditions, warm days in the 75 to 85 degree range, average soil, a full 1-gallon jug, will release its water steadily over 3 to 5 days. So your routine becomes wonderfully simple. Every 5 days or so, walk out with the hose, top each jug off in about 30 seconds, and go on with your morning. Now, 5 days isn't a law, it's a starting rhythm. Your soil and weather will tell you the rest. No more daily watering, no more guessing. But here's where it gets real, because not every garden is the same. If you garden in sandy soil like a lot of folks down in Florida, Texas, parts of the Southwest, you'll likely need to refill closer to every 3 days. Sandy soil drains fast. The jug doesn't change that physics. If you've got heavy clay common across the Midwest and the Northeast, you might stretch it to 6 or 7 days. Because clay holds water longer, raised beds dry quicker than in-ground soil, so check them sooner. And grow bags on the patio? Check those daily during a heat wave. Those fabric walls breathe out water fast. The jug helps everywhere, but it won't magically hold water your soil can't. During a long stretch of 90-degree days, bump up your refills by a day or two regardless of soil type. And your insurance policy is always the finger test. Stick your finger 3 or 4 inches into the soil, about 6 inches away from the jug. Cool and slightly damp? You're fine. Dry and crumbly? Refill. Soggy? Skip a day. The plant always tells you what it needs. And that brings us back to blossom end rot, because now you can see exactly why this method helps. Let me tell you why eggshells usually disappoint people. Crushed eggshells take years to break down into a form your tomato roots can absorb. By the time that calcium is plant available, Your grandchildren will be in middle school. Foliar calcium sprays struggle too. Once a tomato reaches golf ball size, its skin turns waxy and waterproof. Most of the spray just runs right off. And Epsom salts? That's magnesium, which actually competes with calcium for root uptake. You can end up making the problem worse. Steady, deep moisture is different. When water is moving consistently through the plant, calcium hitches a ride and travels up to the fruit, where it's needed. The calcium was already in your soil all along. It just couldn't get there because the water kept stopping and starting. Now, this won't cure every case of blossom end rot. Sometimes it's a nitrogen problem, sometimes a soil pH issue, but it addresses the most common cause, the one the eggshells and sprays never touch. In my garden, I went from losing about a third of my tomatoes every July to losing almost none. Same soil, same varieties, only the watering changed. There's one more thing this method gives you. And honestly, it might be the best part. This summer, if your daughter calls and says, "Mom, can you come up for a long weekend?" The grandkids are asking for you. You don't have to hesitate anymore. You don't have to glance out the window at your tomato plants and start calculating. Fill your jugs Friday morning, throw your bag in the car, and go. The garden has a little more backup while you're away. And you don't have to feel like you're imposing on a neighbor either. I know that feeling, the little knot in your stomach when you have to ask someone for a favor. With this system, you don't have to ask as often. For those of us who want to keep our gardens going for as long as we possibly can without having to give up because the work got too heavy, this method protects your back, your knees, and your independence. There's no shame in working smarter as the years go by. That's wisdom. That's experience. That's what a lifetime of gardening teaches you. Before we wrap up, let me cover 3 small problems that might come up and exactly how to handle each one. First, mosquitoes. If you ever see them hanging around the jug, drop a quarter of a mosquito dunk into the water. You can find them at any hardware store. They're widely used around gardens and generally considered safe when you follow the label, but they kill mosquito larvae before they can hatch. Or keep the cap loosely on, not wide open. The goal is to let air in, but keep mosquitoes and debris out. Second, clogged holes. If you notice the jug isn't draining after a few days, the holes have probably picked up some fine soil. Pull the jug up, rinse it out, poke the holes clear with a toothpick, and rebury it. Some folks prevent this entirely by wrapping the bottom of the jug in a thin piece of landscape fabric before burying, especially helpful if you've got heavy clay soil. And third, winterizing. When the first frost is on its way, pull your jugs out of the ground, give them a rinse with vinegar water, and store them in the shed or garage for the winter. Leave them in frozen soil, and the ice will crack the plastic. Treat them right, and one jug will last you 2, sometimes 3 growing seasons. So that's the whole thing. 3 quick reminders before you go. First, bury 1 or 2 milk jugs near each tomato plant. Holes underground, neck above ground, cap loose. Second, refill every 3 to 7 days, depending on your soil and your weather. And third, cover that exposed neck with mulch. That's it. That's the system. If this method helps your garden this summer, come back and tell me about it. I want to hear how it works in your soil, your climate, your part of the country. We're a community here, and the best gardening wisdom doesn't come from books or experts. It comes from people who took the time to share what they learned. That old market gardener who taught me this trick? He passed away a few years back. But every summer, when I bury these jugs and watch my tomatoes thrive without me having to break my back, I think of him. The best things in gardening don't come from a store. They come from people who care enough to pass them down. Thank you for letting me share with you today. I'll see you in the next one.